Buenas tardes, surfistas. Welcome to the very first episode of Live from Surf City, coming to you straight from the glossy black sand beaches outside of Secot. I'm your host, Valeria Vega. Has your tia been talking about how nice El Paisito is now that all the mareros have been thrown in jail? Are you glad to be able to visit the family rancho without getting mugged, but, maybe in the back of your mind, a little disturbed that this might be at the expense of a security policy that's basically the Salvadoran equivalent of an ICE raid? Are mareros people? Can we solve all our problems by locking them up and throwing away the key? Should YouTubers have more of a right to visit prison than the families of incarcerated folks? Why are we so tranqui about mass incarceration in El Salvador, but riot against it in the United States? We'll address these and many more inquietudes throughout this episode, where we interview Mayra, the anthropologist, who studies how family dynamics are affected by Salvadoran carceral regimes. We skip straight past the Western media coverage of Kilmar Abrego and the Venezuelan deportees to get to the heart of what mass incarceration means for everyday Salvadorans, since their civil liberties were suspended under the state of exception 3 years ago. No charges, no trials, no end in sight. Come with us this season to listen to these and other stories from what we affectionately call El Salvador. This is Live from Surf City. Good afternoon, surfers. We are sweltering in this god-awful heat, but probably much less so than our unfortunate compatriots that are sweltering inside of Secot. We are here today with a very intrepid anthropologist named Mayra. Hi, thanks for being here with us today.
Hi.
Thanks for cooking in the heat with us. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you, and why do you know so much about mass incarceration in El Salvador?
Well, first, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be in the heat with you today. So, I'm a Salvadoran anthropologist, and I've been trained in El Salvador and in the US. And, for the past 10 years, I've been interested in doing research in questions around security in the context of gang violence in El Salvador. And most recently, maybe in the past 4 to 5 years, I've been exploring the carceral aspect of it. So I did for my doctoral dissertation, I did an ethnographic work with families of incarcerated people for 2 years. And I was trying to follow them at the gates of prisons and courtrooms and family homes to explore how they were navigating the criminal justice system, while also trying to organize to defend the life of their imprisoned loved ones. So I've been, I think, trying to think about carceral security politics from a feminist perspective that considers the practices that sustain life in an era of mass incarceration. And I am very invested in narratives of the carceral system that center around the voices and experiences of families, because I think that they're the ones who are disproportionately shouldering the weight and the cost of carceral politics, while also trying to reimagine different forms of justice for their families.
There's a lot to unpack in that introduction. I'm going to start with what it means to have a feminist approach to, did you say carceral studies? Did I remember that right? What does that mean?
I think as I was saying, like trying to center on the practices that sustain life. And in this case, thinking about how families are playing a crucial role to sustain life of prison, of people not only outside of prisons, but inside in ways that I think are disproportionate. But also thinking about their organizing work as a form of defending life in a moment in which it is being discarded. So I think that focusing on that opens like new windows to sort of bring complexity to this moment of mass incarceration.
Can you tell us a bit about the prison landscape that these families are up against? It sounds like here they're kind of up against more and more of a beast of a system, right? Since you've been observing these kinds of things for quite a while now, you've seen it before and after the state of exception and so on. So what does the prison landscape look like now?
The prison landscape in El Salvador has been shaped by the war on gangs, which started in 2003 officially by the right-wing party at the time, Arena. And that was at the same time part of this broader exportation of the war on terror, into Central America. So I think that the prison landscape has been shaped in that sense of even like in the way that it is organized around the maximum security facilities and the ordinary prisons for the rest of the incarcerated population, and the maximum security designed to house, gang members or alleged gang members.
Mayra's comment about the exportation of the war on terror to El Salvador, by the way, is not an exaggeration. The United States has always played a big role in shaping the country's security policy, even more so since 9/11. El Salvador's mano dura practices began, for example, under American freedom-loving President Francisco Flores, who, among other things, is known for his dollarization of the Salvadoran economy and for sending Salvadoran troops to help the invasion of Iraq in the mid-2000s. Around the same time, the U.S. State Department opened its only Latin America branch of the International Law Enforcement Academy in El Salvador, which trains police from the region. Maybe as a thank you for sending Central Americans to the Middle East. Another fun fact, Rudy Giuliani was at one point a security advisor to the Salvadoran government, at the time when he was still America's mayor, known for cleaning up New York City and putting on a brave face during September 11th, rather than for smearing his makeup, holding a memorable press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping, and making a horny cameo in the second Borat movie. All this to say, the terrorist as bogeyman cornerstone of U.S. security policy has had a very direct impact on El Salvador's ideas of what safety means.
I think you were asking as well about in the earlier, about the role of Secot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the ¿cómo se llama? That's like yeah, what's it called? The sort of like, I don't know, poster child right now for Salvadoran prisons is Secot. So how does that fit into that, what you're describing, right? The maximum security and then like everything else.
That in a way it is like the amplification of this maximum security model. And I think also, I forgot to say, to understand, like, I think the prison landscape in El Salvador, it is important to situate it in a transnational relation of carceral regimes with the U.S. But at the same time, I don't know if I would describe the Salvadoran landscape as a prison industrial complex in the way that we articulate it in the U.S. Well, I think that in the U.S., it is a concept that it is talking about that increasing alliance between the military, the government, and the corporate world that has resulted in this privatized carceral system. And I don't think, I mean, while I do think that we are seeing those increasing alliance, I don't think that we have the same like privatized kind of carceral system or the scale that we are having it in the U.S. But at the same time, I do think that, for instance, the construction of the prison is sort of shifting a little bit towards that direction. And I'm thinking of like the scandals that surrounded the construction of the prison, right? Yeah, I mean, this new mega prison was built or enabled by this legislation that was surpassing, I don't know if that's the word, like surpassing like the public contract regulations. And at the same time that granted like tax exemptions for public and private entities that were involved in the design and the planning and construction of the prison. Yeah, I mean, definitely a business.
Yeah, because I feel like those are the like free trade zones here, right? That they don't have to pay taxes on their constructions either. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So I kind of feel that really shows how the prison landscape is increasingly going into that direction. I mean, or at least revealing that the economic logics that are very blunt around the carceral system.
Are we at the point where the country is dependent on prison labor, like it's happening in the U.S., or is that not quite the same?
Formally, the inmates in the stage of trust, or in Spanish, en fase de confianza, have some penitentiary benefits, and one of those is to be able to work in exchange of having your like sentence time reduced. So that was only happening for people that were already convicted and that were in a certain trust stage.
Would it be like parole? Or no, they're still imprisoned?
Because I'm not sure how it works in the parole part. Just because my English is really bad. It's dying. But maybe, yeah, I don't know.
According to El Salvador's penitentiary law, the fase de confianza means greater privileges for inmates who have demonstrated good behavior and completed at least a third of their sentence, as a way to help them readjust to society, including through things like furloughs and more family visits. It seems that right now, though, all it means is more chances for them to work on government construction sites.
But the thing is that there are a lot of rumors about how people who have been detained under the state of exception, so these are people who have not been sentenced yet, they are being part of or being drawn into this labor system. And also there has been always a lot of irregularities around prison labor, in the sense of, I remember a lot of families before the state of exception that were talking about how family members would go out to work. It's mostly in the construction area in El Salvador, but their time was not being counted. So a lot of family members were talking about the exploitation that was taking place. So I cannot say what is happening right now because we don't have a lot of information, but the rumors that circulate is that there is a form of labor that is being required from people detained from the state of exception. But I don't know what type of requirements or how they are filtering who has access to that or not, or who is being exploited. We don't have a lot of information.
I feel like I've heard those rumors about the construction of the Binayes, for example, and like maybe the Aeropuerto del Pacífico, maybe.
And in Surf City as well. Yeah. I mean, but that was that was before the state of exception. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's so creepy. I mean, the reason I've heard these rumors is because locals in any of those places will be like, wow, there's a creepy amount of military presence like surrounding the workers, and it really seems like they're being heavily surveilled as they're coming and going from their job site, right?
I've heard those rumors, as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tell us about Secot specifically. Is it the country's biggest, baddest prison, like the American media wants us to believe, or what's the deal with it?
So it is the biggest prison. That's why it is literally like a mega prison. It is supposed to house 50,000 people who are labeled as terrorists and especially gang members.
The organization Servicio Social Pasionista has noted that the published 40,000 person capacity of Secot might still be overselling it, as this maximum occupancy of the mega prison would mean that each inmate only gets about a square meter of room to themselves.
We don't have a lot of information, like official information, but we have had a lot of YouTubers do a lot of prison tourism in very problematic ways. And the images that they show, of course, are very sanitized. But apparently it is a newer prison, so the facility is aesthetically prettier than the other ones. But, we've already had the testimonies of the first Venezuelans who are talking about the similar prison conditions of abuse and torture than in other prison centers. So, in that sense, I think it could be maybe similar to other prison centers.
So it's like, I don't know, maybe cleaner, maybe less falling apart, but they're still dealing with the same kind of poor food quality, prison abuses by the guards. And
according to those testimonies, yes.
Tell us about Salvadoran prisons in general. What is a Salvadoran prison like? What do people have access to? And I think similarly, what does that mean for their families?
What we knew about prisons before the state of exception was a mix of what families had access to when they had family visits and family calls, which is something that was suspended first in 2019 and then 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. And also...
and it hasn't resumed since
then. Hasn't resumed, yeah. So it's been... Some families haven't been in conversation with their family members for 5 years. But this is worse for the families of the people that were in maximum security prisons before the state of exception, because their communication was interrupted with the extraordinary security measures of 2016. So some families have 9 years without one single communication with their family members.
2016, their loved ones weren't like have no right to family visits and that kind of stuff if they're in max.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what we knew about prisons was what like you would hear from families, and also like reports from human rights organizations, and some reports that escalated to the International Human Rights Court that were talking about questions of overcrowding. I mean, before the state of exception, there was, I think, 38,000 incarcerated people in prisons, and that was already surpassing the operational capacity of prisons. So you can imagine right now we have more than 100,000 people. I really can't imagine how they are existing. Like families and those testimonies keep telling us is that there was a very poor diet and very limited access to proper medical care, a lot of medical neglect. And the feminist movement had also been denouncing for years how the carceral system was waging against women. I mean, more in the context of the criminalization of obstetric emergencies and abortion, but also the type of vulnerability to sexual abuse inside of prisons, and the difficult access to hygiene products in the context of menstruation. I think it's the same for like sexual dissidents in general. So that was a little bit like the prison landscape, but also, I mean, what prisons looked like. And I think that with the state of exception, that has just like deepened in the sense that we have bigger overcrowding and also some transformations in the criminal justice system, like institutions are being oversaturated, so access to a public defense is really difficult, and access to a private defense is very expensive, or it's marked with experiences of scams as reported by family members. And a lot of judicial reforms that are extending investigation times or postponing hearings, or we're seeing like the growing power of the carceral authorities, penitentiary authorities, in relation to the penitentiary courtrooms. We're seeing like that landscape, and I think that is impacting and putting families in a vulnerable position, in the sense that the lack of access to a legal service is very difficult, and also information. So families are jumping from one institution to the other, trying to stitch together pieces of information about their family members. And there's a question of opacity, I think, also in prisons, like an institutional politics of opacity and of silencing, that I think started with this communication blackout that we were talking about, because and families have been denouncing, like since the beginning in 2019, that is something that is putting lives at risk in prison, especially right now that we have testimonies from human rights organizations about abuses, torture, and even death. You know, we have the local organization Socorro Jurídico Humanitario that reported, I think, 480 deaths in the past 2 days or something. And we think that could go up to 1,000 if we consider mass graves or that type of thing.
Again, the difficulty with these numbers is that there's a total information blackout from the government when it comes to prison conditions. There have been at least 261 independently verified deaths in prison since the state of exception, as noted by Cristosal. But as Mayra and Socorro Jurídico say, the number is likely much higher because families may be too afraid to come forward to talk about the deaths of their loved ones, or their loved ones may have simply died in prison without any next of kin ever being informed. As it stands, any contemporary human rights report you'll read on prison conditions in El Salvador is an absolute horror show of beatings, torture, starvation, rampant disease, and overcrowding. So, like, who is stepping in to fix this?
Who is stepping in to fix this? Family. I mean, not to fix it, but
it's a bit of a facetious question, right? Because you would think that, like, in normal circumstances, there would be some kind of body or something that you could appeal to advocate for your loved ones, or, you know, baseline advocate for more humane conditions, if you believe in that kind of thing, which you probably should. So what are people doing now?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult because the few instances that we used to have of are being dismantled with the Ley de Gente Extranjeros. I don't know how you say that in English.
Foreign Agents Law, I think.
Mm-hmm. And with the arrest of many human rights defenders.
El Salvador reached a creepy turning point when it comes to civil society in May of 2025, when the government arrested prominent human rights lawyers Ruth Lopez and Enrique Anaya. and approve the Foreign Agents Law, which requires all nonprofits to register in a government database and pay 30% of their income to the state. If the registry decides an organization is engaging in political activism that disrupts the public order, the Salvadoran government can effectively end its operations.
I mean, I think in some ways families have learned to navigate a little bit that system, like looking for the blind spots of the system. Like I think that they have identified, they are doing active work not to liberate, but to at least being able to take care of their family members. And I think that they have learned to identify places in which they know that some judges will take some legal appeals or habeas corpus or a type of like legal document in favor of their family member. So they know that they're not going to go to the Constitutional Court in San Salvador, obviously, because it is being co-opted by the government, but they know that in this city, like 2 hours outside of the capital, like this judge is helping out a little bit. So they're sort of navigating through these blind spots, I think. Of course, the reach of action is very limited. Yeah, I think they are being very creative in the context and within the possibilities that they have.
You've talked a little bit about how things have changed in prisons regarding overcrowding since the state of exception, but I actually don't think that on this podcast we've talked about what the hell the state of exception is. So what is the state of exception, and how else do you think it's impacted the Salvadoran prison system?
I mean, the state of exception was a state of emergency that was declared 3 years ago after the massacre of 87 civilians that were attributed to the MS-13 gang. And the result was the suspension of constitutional protections and a politics of mass arrest, and that I think was unprecedented in scale in El Salvador. I do think that the state of exception is part of that larger history of iron fist, mano dura policies, and the politics of mass arrest. I mean, the first wave of mass arrests that we had were actually in 2003, so the first year of mano dura policies, where I think 19,000 young men mostly were detained.
Do you remember that being broadcast on TV? I remember that shit. Do you remember that shit?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, like they would like show the raids on the nightly news and stuff like that. It was like kind of like an evening spectacle for everyone else that wasn't living in those neighborhoods, you know?
No, definitely. And it was the start of these like very famous stigmatization of tattoos on their bodies, the type of clothes, and of course from people coming from marginalized communities. So at the time, all these people were like rounded up by the police. I think but they were put in provisional detention, and just 5% of those cases proceeded to investigation court, or what we call here juzgado de instrucción, because of there wasn't enough evidence. So right now, what we're seeing is 5 times the level of detentions, and up to the point of, I think right now, 2.6% of the population, total population of the country is in prisons. So that's super crazy. So with the state of exception, so there was these mass arrests, and I think it, as I was saying earlier, I think it changed the criminal justice system, and I think it deepened penal subsystem that was already building up. Penal system that is just designed for gang members and with less protections and everything. I don't know.
I mean, it sounds, based on what you're saying, it kind of sounds like Bukele is kind of replicating that same sort of strategy that Antonio Saca was putting into place at that time, but getting rid of the barrier of having to charge people, right? Like, because you can just do these mass arrests and throw everybody in jail, and like, they don't have to necessarily go before a judge, right? Like, unlike in 2003 where there was some semblance of due process, I guess.
I mean, I think how do you say, la correlación de fuerza. But what I want to say is la correlación de fuerza.
We'll work on it. We'll figure it out. I have to think about that one too.
But I mean, I think that the context of the power of his party, I think is what allowed, these like mass arrests to not go through the judicial filter, because in 2021 he got rid of 1/3 of the judges through a legislation to the law of the judicial profession, something like that. I don't know how to translate. La ley de la carrera judicial.
Yeah, something like that. That works. In 2021, Nayib Bukele's party, Nuevas Ideas, remade what is basically the most important element of the Salvadoran Supreme Court, the Sala de lo Constitucional, in their image, by firing all previously appointed judges and replacing them with ones approved by the party. The amendment to the judicial profession law that justified this move also eliminated 1/3 of all judges in the entire country.
So yeah, I think it was facilitated by that particular context. And I know that when a lot of people are talking about exporting the Bukele model, I don't feel like it could work in the sense that not all the governments have that correlación de fuerzas. I mean, that power in the I'm sorry that my English is dying.
So besides overcrowding, how do you think that the state of exception has affected the Salvadoran prison system?
I mean, I think it has also shed light on how the state is instrumentalizing the labor of families to sustain life in prisons, which is something that was already taking place before. But I think with the scale of the state of exception, it's becoming really evident of how families are being forced into an invisible, unpaid labor to support families inside. And by that, I mean like materially, with being forced to pay the food and hygiene packages and to deposit money for the commissaries, and mostly I think by being forced to look after the medical conditions of their family members in a moment in which there is no communication. And I'm seeing like a lot of families pushing the authorities to force authorities to perform medical exams, to take people to the hospital, to enter medication for their family members. And I really feel that labor is, in a sense, decelerating the premature death of people inside. If we're thinking of this framework of Ruth Wilson Gilmore and the premature death in prisons, I really feel that their labor is decelerating that, and that also comes with an economic cost, besides, of course, the psychological cost and all of that. And I feel that families are really materially supporting these carceral politics in very uneven ways.
Can you talk about those like food and hygiene packets? Because I don't think that's something that exists in the US at all. I mean, I think there's at least the expectation that prisons in the US will do things like bare minimum give people 3 meals a day, and that doesn't seem to be the case here. So can you explain what they are and how crucial they are?
I mean, supposedly people inside prisons have access to 3 meals. Of course, we know this is a very poor diet.
Poor diet here means rice, beans, and tortillas, sometimes eggs, sometimes cuajada, often in small quantities, often enough too rotten to eat.
And so families are being required to provide food supplements that go from incaparina, how to say that,
it's like formula.
Yeah, like formula type of formula. And other type of supplements, and also hygiene products, like from toilet paper to toothbrush to toothpaste, footwear, uniforms, sheets, towels, and even cleaning products that you would expect the prison to at least provide the cleaning products. And of course, there is a lot of information about how these packages don't always reach their family members. And I've heard several things, from corruption of prison guards to people seeing trucks full of the hygiene packages being taken into another prison. So I don't know, because we don't have a lot of information and we don't have direct communication, it's really hard to really know what's happening. But those food and hygiene packages can cost, in the economic version, let's say $50 per month, and adding $30 every 3 months, because those extra $30 are for sheets, towels, and uniforms every 3 months, because they only allow the entrance of that every 3 months.
And how much is an average Salvadoran salary?
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, if you are officially in the system, it's less than $300, right? And most of these families are working in the informal economy.
So they're not even making minimum wage.
Exactly. And most of the people that were inside the prisons were an economic support for the families outside of prison. So that has meant a lot of domestic rearrangement, economic rearrangements. Yeah, there's a lot to say, like families traveling from one side of the country to the other to deliver their packages and then finding out that their relatives are not there. A lot of irregularities and a lot of money involved in this.
What happens, I want to talk more about the families in a second, but what happens to inmates if they don't get those packages?
So I've heard that in some prisons, the inmates are organized, have like a self-organization, and they distribute whatever they have access to. So sometimes I've heard family members recommending other families, like, if you really don't have money, like, don't worry. Like, in some senses, they're gonna find a way to eat, but of course in really precarious conditions. And I know that there are some systems of exchange, like you can exchange a little bit of food for access to a hygiene product or something, or vice versa. So people have, there's like an economic system inside between inmates.
But otherwise, they're just kind of like dirty and malnourished, basically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about that part that you just hinted at about inmates often being a source of income for their own families, and then what happens once they can't work and therefore contribute to their household?
Yeah, that has like literally meant that families are in a more precarious condition, and mostly families that are led by women, or women are being forced to take care of the household economy, to work harder or to leave their kids alone. I've heard also the case of children that are literally left alone, and I really don't, like, we don't know who they are with, because sometimes they don't have a grandmother anymore or an aunt. So I've heard speculations maybe they're with the neighbors. So there's a lot of care labor that is involved in sustaining families outside of prison as well, in addition to the ones inside.
So is this making anything better?
No.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more stuff, but yeah, your honest reaction. Is this making anything better?
No, I think my first reaction is that I feel that it's, as I was saying earlier, that I think it's families who at the end are the ones who are shouldering the cost of this type of mass incarceration project in uneven ways, because of how they have to rearrange to support their families outside and inside. Yeah, so my reaction is no.
But we've fixed the gang problem, right? Like, all of this is allegedly being done to fix this big monster of unsolvable issues that has been the gang problem in El Salvador, like, ever since the peace accords, basically. So, like, we did it, right? Or maybe not.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because I do feel that we can't deny the fact that a lot of people are experiencing a different sense of security in relation to gangs specifically, because I do think that gangs were a threat to people's lives, and that extortions were really suffocating family economies. But I don't know if we have fixed the gang problem, in the sense that we are also experiencing more insecurity from the police because of the records of arbitrary detentions. And also, I don't know if we have fixed the structural conditions behind.
No way, you built a whole prison. That's a structure.
Yeah, but
right? You wanted us to fix this, and we built another structure. So, like, we're good, right?
Yeah, but I feel that the possibilities of, if we think of security in a feminist sense, of being able to sustain a life project or sustain the conditions for your social reproduction, I kind of feel that has become harder, in the sense that while we are having people being jailed, that is also making invisible a deepening of this like neoliberal project. I think the government has been very invested in these extractive mega projects that are displacing communities through land and water grabs, and at the same time dismantling the public service system. So I feel that the possibilities to guarantee the social reproduction of life are really difficult. It depends on how I think we define security, I guess, for this conversation. Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by, okay, so I know I'm like giving you shit about fixing the structural problems, but like, what do you think are the structural issues that are still around, or are maybe getting worse, or maybe staying the same, that led to the explosion of MS-13 and MS-18?
the social exclusion and poverty and like young people not having access to education and to like entering the labor system in a dignified way. We haven't solved that. As I was saying, I think that the economic project that the government is developing is just making life for rural people and working class communities even more precarious.
But Surf City's so pretty.
But we are also displacing people in surf cities.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So
Like, to continue to be a bit facetious, right? Do you think that this government, its particular kind of development and goals or whatever, is that able to provide the kind of dignified jobs that would lead us out of those structural problems that you're mentioning?
no, I mean, I really don't see that. I mean, we're seeing that with, I don't know, from the displacement of street vendors in downtown San Salvador, which is like the core of his project, let's say, up to the displacement of people around Surf City. So I don't know, what I'm seeing is a real neglect to working class communities from the government and restricting access to these dignified ways of life, I think.
I'm trying to say this in a way that isn't like, I am going to say this in a way that's playing devil's advocate, because I feel like every time I have these conversations, or that people like you and I have these conversations, you always get the like, but the gangs, like, kind of reaction. And I think the pushback to what you just said would be something along the lines of, well, getting rid of the gangs is also helping working class people. So what would you say to that?
I mean, yes, in the sense that it is not. Good question. I mean, yes, in the sense of extortions, which were like, as I was saying, like suffocating families. But at the same time, we're seeing a high increase of the cost of life here in El Salvador, which is insane. Like in ways similar to places that I've lived in the US. So, and these people are surviving with the minimum wage, right? And that in addition to, what I want to say is that I understand that people not making the connections between the economic politics and how that translates into their everyday life. But I think that there is a connection there. And at the same time, I don't think that we should reduce the value of how people feel right now without gangs in their territories, because I do think that people are experiencing something different than before. But I don't know if that means necessarily better economic conditions.
I think that the other end of that pushback is not just, I think that also kind of stems from an underlying belief that just gang members are not human, right? And that, fuck them. If they're guilty, who cares if they're eating poor quality food? Who cares if they're being beaten up by guards? Who cares if they can't talk to their sister? Their sister's probably a gangbanger too. They just haven't locked her up yet, who cares that they haven't seen a lawyer? Who cares that they haven't gone to trial or even had any charges, right? These people have been ruining the country, so they're deserving exactly what they get.
No, I mean, I really feel that there's a difficult reconciliation with gang violence, and that is reifying these racializing forms of relating to gang members. I mean, that I think it's something that it's happening. I don't know how to answer to. I mean, there's of course the fact that not everybody who is a gang member is being put in prison, but it's not the question of who is innocent or not, but rather like the system itself trying to solve problems by just jailing people, right?
So I guess the pushback to that would then be like, that sucks for them, it's very unfortunate, but like at the end of the day, who cares, right? If we got 80-90% of the gang members off the street and say like 10%, 20% of the people arrested are innocent, que lástima, but like I can now take my family out to dinner and not worry about getting mugged on the car on the way back,
No, yeah, I mean, yeah, I've heard I've heard that as well. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something there that I also think that we shouldn't deny.
It's more because like we're gonna hear these talking points over and over and over and over again, and I mean, I guess I should ask you, like, are you against the idea of mass incarceration? Because I'm kind of like, I don't know, at the end of the day, it just comes down to like, I just don't believe that that's right for humans. And yes, I'm sorry, I do consider those people humans. That's that's kind of what it is. I don't really necessarily need to get super intellectual about it. It's more just like, yeah, these people that have done god-awful things deserve rights because they're human. And also if we have this category of like irredeemable monster, I'm like, anyone can fall in that. Like, as we've seen with political prisoners here, right? You know, like anybody can all of a sudden become a terrorist if le cae mal al gobierno, right? You were talking about racializing stuff, and that seems like an interesting avenue to go down because there's a very fun clip that I want to watch with you. You said something about like the racializing aspect of gang members and so on, but I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's thinking about how gangs are being turned into non-human others, and we have several colleagues working on that. Elizabeth Velasquez, shout out. Yeah, and thinking about how gangs have been constructed through these past 20 plus years as a social plague, and because they have been turned into the social plague, then the state can legitimize violence against them. And I kind of feel that those tensions have been intensified with the state of exception, and at the same time that has been, I think, extended to families of incarcerated people and the incarcerated population who are being criminalized in racializing ways as gang members. Because of that, the state can legitimize to jail them and to dehumanize them and like literally kill them because of the prison conditions that we have here in El Salvador. So when I said racialization, I was thinking of that. Mm-hmm.
I'm asking also because I feel like when I have these conversations with people or when I read these kinds of comments, this doesn't seem to be a kind of logic that they extend to prisoners and over-policing and mass incarceration in the US. It seems to be something that is only really uncontestedly naturalized here, which I find really disturbing, you know what I mean? Because I'm like, this is the exact same logic that has led to Black folks in the US being the most over-incarcerated racial group in the entire United States, right? Proportionally. And people, I think, not universally, obviously, because MAGA exists, right? like, but people think that that's a bad thing. But here it's sort of like, there's nothing to be done about the issue besides locking them up. And I'm like, can you hear yourself? Like, you would never say that about a US citizen, but here it's considered to be lo que hay que hacer, right? There's like no other alternative.
No, I mean, it's really complicated. I don't know, people like Elisa would say that there's a larger history that connects to that. That I feel that it's not like stretching it out. I think I also feel that way, that there is a larger history of the indigenous elimination and of really turning other people into non-humans, and that I think that indigenous stigma has also been placed onto people who we see as criminals here in El Salvador. It feels like it's something that has been sedimented over like decades, basically. But I definitely agree with you that I feel that there is something about gang violence that just surpasses rational, that it becomes very instinctive to see people as non-humans or to just wish for their death or whatever. But I kind of feel that it's tied to how life was under threat with gang violence, which is also true, you know. But I think that we haven't been able to think about forms of, I don't even want to say reconciliation, but reparation or a dialogue. I was talking to a family member a few days ago, and she was saying, like, sometimes I wish I would just have the chance to say, like, why did you kill my family member? Like, be honest. I know that you, like, probably you were pressured by your own leaders, but just to hear that out, like, would help. I don't know if that's something that everybody feels the same way, because I kind of feel that what justice means is very personal. But I'm thinking of that we haven't had spaces of that. And also, if we think in history with the war as well, we just put everything under the rug. And I kind of feel that there's like continuities in that sense.
Do you think there's space for a penal system, like anywhere, I guess, to be able to offer that kind of personalized reconciliation? Or like, how do we even get that to happen? Is it like in a post-carceral state only? Or like, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are like community experiments elsewhere of different like community repairs that deal with that. Of course, it's not something that has that is expanded throughout the world. But I don't know if a penal system could do that. Just because I feel that the categories that they play with are very binary and simple, like the victim and the oppressor. That doesn't open a room for nuance, and I don't know.
I mean, that's like such a brave question that your family member like said out loud, you know. I just want to understand what was going on in your life that led you to do this, right? Because that opens up like a Pandora's box of nuance, right? That she's willing to hear. And I guess not everybody is really willing to do that.
Yeah, that's why I was saying I kind of feel that that's one opinion. It doesn't mean that it's everyone's opinion. But I guess it's questions that some people are having.
Do you want to watch this crazy Democratic Party ad about sending someone to Secot? Did you watch it? No. Okay. I don't know. I feel like this is really like on the nose about naturalizing the kind of racial, what's the word? Objection of the third world. Like this is just where criminals belong. I don't know.
What are you doing?
She's coming with us.
What are you talking about? Who are you?
I'm your Republican congressman. Now that we're in charge, we're rounding up illegals.
She was born here. She's a citizen.
I don't care. She looks like one of them. But don't worry. When she's in prison in El Salvador, she'll have lots of company.
Oh my God.
All right, Mayra, what do you have to say about that? Tell us.
No, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, like the naturalization of El Salvador as the place for, I mean, like literally, that's what like Trump said like years ago, that it's the shithole, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's the result of his like histories of and centuries of U.S. imperialism that translated into these racial hierarchies that we feel like El Salvador is shithole.
That was a Democrat ad.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. It's a crazy fucking thing, you know? Like that's what makes me, I don't know, like it's like, oh wow, it's all you people think this way about this country. You know, like even like so-called progressives, right?
Yeah, it's problematic. I didn't know he was a Democrat. Oh my God, that's so sad.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure how to go about wrapping this one up, but you know, just thinking about how freaking weird it is that white progressives, Latino progressives, white conservatives, whatever, like everybody just seems to be really cool with the idea of Bukele rounding people up and throwing them in prison, right? Like that's just the way things are done in El Salvador. And there's no other way to think about it because it's El Salvador, right? We can't think of a different kind of paradigm.
And I think we go back to the beginning of this, of also how the U.S. has shaped this carceral landscape, right? Ooh, and it's something with the export of this war on terror that translated into this war on gangs. What we have has been, you know, shaped by, I mean, they literally like trained, funded, created these anti-gang police task forces, and the idea in itself of creating a terrorist and non-human other comes directly from the paradigm of the war on terror. It's problematic not to see that history and of how the U.S. is part of the shithole.
Yeah. The U.S. kind of made the shithole, man. Yeah. They kind of dug the hole to put the shit in, like, quite honestly. And now they're like, that's just the way things are. What would you like to see different then, based on the research that you've been doing with families and just your own personal ideas of what's going on? Because it does sound like you recognize that the lack of gang presence in the streets is significant, right, to a lot of people, but clearly the way it's happening is not helpful to people in the short or long term. What do you want to see?
I mean, I would love to see prisons disappear. Of course, that's not gonna happen. I mean, I would love to see families being, I don't know, recognizing how families are being instrumentalized by at least the state of exception, by the government, and I don't know, to bring out families' understanding of the carceral system and all the injustices that are part of it. Because, of course, we're not going to see a world without prisons in El Salvador. But I do think that these families have a lot to offer in terms of understanding the carceral system and of at least imagining other forms of justice that are within and against the carceral state, but that are valuable, I think. So, yeah, I don't know.
Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, that's it. I'm sweating.
Okay, well, let's turn the fan back on. Thank you so much, Mayra, for being with us today. I really appreciate all of your insight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to sweat with you.
Thanks so much for being with us today, surfers. Tune in later this month for another killer episode on the El Salvador /Surf City brand. All rights reserved. Terms and conditions may apply. Salud!